A teenage black girl sat quietly in seat 3A, first class. She said nothing, did nothing. She simply sat in the seat printed on her ticket. But just minutes later, she was called a fraud, ordered to get up and get out, and even had her cheek grabbed in the middle of the most expensive row on an international flight. No one knew who she was. No one intervened. Until the cabin door swung open. A man stepped inside. He didn't speak. He didn't introduce himself. Just one look, and first class fell dead silent, because they had just realized the girl they had humiliated was the only daughter of the director of the FBI of the United States. And that man, he didn't come to apologize. He came to restore the order of justice. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. The sound of suitcase wheels echoed softly across the polished airport floor with each steady step. Layla Monroe, 16 years old, black and an honors student, walked through the security gate with bright eyes and a heart full of hope. In her hand, she clutched her first-class boarding pass like a treasure. Flight AA402, Astraeus Airlines, Seat 3A. Destination, Santorini, Greece. Purpose, her first vacation with her father after years apart. 3 weeks earlier, while Layla was bent over an essay on social justice, her father, Darius Monroe, director of the FBI, sat beside her and quietly said, "I promise, this time will be different. No meetings, no phone. 2 weeks, just you and me." To others, it might have been just a promise. But to Layla, it was sacred. For 16 years, she had lived in the shadow of a great man. A man who appeared on national news more often than he showed up for her milestones. 8th grade graduation, the spring concert, the state debate championship. The seat beside her was always empty. But today he was here. Not in uniform, no security detail, no agents trailing him. Just a father in a charcoal grey suit, wheeling his suitcase beside his daughter, his eyes soft, his smile rare. "You're really keeping that promise, right?" Layla asked, half joking, half hopeful. Darius leaned down, resting a hand on her shoulder, and replied with a smile that held both guilt and resolve. "I turned down the G20 summit just to keep that promise. Now do you understand how serious I am?" Layla laughed, though a flicker of doubt lingered. She knew. Her father's job had never known the meaning of time off. They boarded the plane, entered the first-class cabin of Flight AA402. Flight attendants nodded in greeting. Passengers stepped aside. Some glanced at Layla, the young black girl seated in first class beside a man of power. But Layla was used to those stares. She chose the window seat, 3A, her favorite spot. From there she could watch the clouds, write in her journal, and most of all, capture every fleeting moment beside the man the country revered. But she still longed to truly know. Darius hadn't taken his seat yet. His phone buzzed in his suit pocket. A message, then a call. Layla recognized that look, the look of someone about to leave. "Just 10 minutes, he said, crouching slightly. "A critical security update. I'll be right back." Layla nodded. No blame, no complaint. She was used to the phrase, "I'll be right back." "I promise," he said again, before walking briskly toward the secured cabin reserved for high-level officials. Layla sat alone, gazing out the window. The plane hadn't even taken off yet. But a different kind of journey had already begun. The first-class cabin of Flight AA402 glowed softly under golden ambient lighting, with plush velvet drapes adorning each seat. Layla Monroe gently fastened her seatbelt, tucked her small satchel beneath her seat, and pulled out a dark leather notebook, where she'd been jotting ideas for her upcoming keynote at the International Youth Education Summit in Santorini. Seat 3A, window side on the left, wasn't just a seat. It was a symbol. a promise fulfilled by her father, and a rare moment when she felt allowed to exist in a world she'd always been told she didn't belong to. Outside the window, the late afternoon sun stretched long across the tarmac, its golden light glinting off the aircraft's body like molten gold. Layla smiled softly. Maybe this time, things really would be different. Slam! The cabin door burst open with theatrical force. A pungent wave of perfume rushed in like a tidal wave. And behind it, the sharp, deliberate staccato of heels striking the carpet. "Excuse me. Excuse me." A piercing woman's voice sliced through the serene cabin like a blade through silk. Layla looked up. A white woman in her 40s, heavy-set, heavily made up, draped in a tight cream Chanel dress, stormed down the aisle like a thundercloud in designer heels. Louis Vuitton handbag, scarlet stilettos, eyes laced with judgment. She stopped directly in front of row 3. Her gaze raked Layla from head to toe, swift, scathing, and seething with malice. "Get up," she ordered. Layla blinked. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I said, get up now." She bit off each word as if she were addressing a housemaid who had dared to sit on the palace furniture. Layla calmly reached into the seat pocket, pulled out her ticket, and held it up. "Seat 3A is mine. The boarding pass was scanned already." The woman lunged forward, snatched the ticket from her hand, glanced at it, then tossed it back onto the seat like it was trash. "Mistake. There's clearly been a mistake," she muttered, leaning in so close Layla could smell the bitterness on her breath. "Look at you, a little black girl, wearing a school blazer, carrying a cheap fabric tote. You really think you belong in first class?" The entire cabin froze. A few passengers glanced over. Some frowned, but no one said a word. Layla took a deep breath. She'd endured looks like this before, words like this before, but never so blatant. And never in a space owned by a national airline. "Mom, you should double-check your ticket," Layla said, voice steady but eyes growing colder. The woman yanked her own boarding pass from her designer purse. 3C aisle seat, not 3A, not the window. She fell silent for a beat, then curled her lips into a contemptuous smile. "I'm Whitney Langford, wife of the United States Deputy Attorney General," she declared loudly. "I do not sit next to people like you." Layla locked eyes with her. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. Behind them, a passenger quietly raised their phone and hit record. Outside the cabin, the skies remained calm, but inside, a storm was beginning to gather. The air in the first-class cabin turned thick, as if even the molecules were weighed down by discomfort and rising tension. Whitney Langford stood squarely in the aisle, her face flushed crimson, equal parts rage and wounded pride. Layla remained seated, both hands neatly folded on her lap, eyes calm and still, like a lake just after a storm surge. "You just gonna sit there?" Whitney hissed. "Think you're clever, huh?" Layla opened her mouth to respond, but she never got the chance. Whitney's hand shot forward, grabbing Layla's cheek with a sharp twist, pinching the soft skin of a 16-year-old girl in broad daylight, in the middle of a luxury cabin. "I'll call security," Whitney shrieked, her voice shrill and slicing like an emergency siren. "People like you don't belong in this cabin. You hear me?" Her shout echoed through the cabin. A few passengers flinched and turned around. Faces once filled with awkward confusion now shifted to disbelief, then to anger. But still, no one spoke. Layla froze, not because of the pain, but because of the humiliation. Raw, unmasked, in front of a silent crowd. She didn't cry. She didn't fight back. She simply turned her face, calmly removed Whitney's hand from her cheek, and reached into her blazer pocket. With trembling fingers, she typed a short message. "Dad, help me." The text sent. The screen blinked. Delivered Darius Monroe. Layla clutched the phone in one hand. The other hand gripped her boarding pass. as if it were her last shred of dignity in the eye of a storm built on hate. Whitney was still yelling, "Security, I want her off this flight. She's an imposter, a fraud. She's a threat to aviation safety." In row 6, a woman with a tightly pulled bun and AirPods slowly removed one earbud. Special Agent Naomi Fields, FBI. She had seen and heard enough. While the passengers hesitated, fumbled with phones, and gawked in disbelief, Naomi had already recorded the entire confrontation. She pulled a specialized device from her coat pocket. With swift precision, she entered a code into the FBI's internal emergency system. Urgent. AA402. Target Layla Monroe assaulted. Suspect Whitney Langford. Request immediate intervention authorization. The signal sent, and a federal network kicked into motion. In the airport's underground security hub, alert lights began flashing green. Inside the VIP operations room, where Director Darius Monroe was reviewing an intelligence report, his phone buzzed. Just once. Just once. But it was enough. To change a flight, to change a life, to rewrite the meaning of power and justice. A long moment of silence settled over the cabin, as if even the air was holding its breath. Then, a piercing shriek tore through the stillness. "People like her don't belong here." Whitney Langford stood tall in the center aisle of the first-class cabin, finger pointed straight at Layla's face like she was condemning a criminal. Her voice rang shrill and high, sharp enough to make several passengers flinch. Layla remained seated, her expression unchanged, but the hand resting on her lap clenched so tightly her fingernails dug into her skin. Seat 3A, what was supposed to be a space of peace and reunion with her father, had now become a stage for public humiliation. The cabin door hissed open, and a uniformed figure quickly stepped inside. Elise Carter, lead flight attendant of Flight AA402, early 30s, brown hair in a neat bun, her demeanor professional to the point of frosty. She had heard and seen enough from the rear of the cabin. "Ma'am," Elise began firmly, yet still with courtesy, "I have verified. Passenger Layla Monroe has a valid boarding pass. Seat 3A is hers." Whitney turned to Elise, eyes burning with fury. "And who exactly are you to defend that thing in front of me?" she snapped. "I am a Diamond member of Australis Airlines. I've flown over 120 flights this year alone." Elise didn't flinch. "I understand, ma'am," she replied calmly. "But our airline serves every passenger equally, regardless of status, race, or age." Whitney laughed, loud, mocking. "This isn't about race. I'm just being honest. She doesn't belong here. She cheapens the entire cabin. And if you don't do something, I'll personally call Thomas Langford, my husband, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, and we'll see how long your airline lasts." The atmosphere dipped even further, like a string being stretched to the breaking point. In seat 2C, a middle-aged man quietly lowered his newspaper. Behind them, two young passengers began recording discreetly on their phones. And in the far left corner of the cabin, the red light on Agent Naomi Fields' secure phone began blinking. The FBI had responded. Elise Carter exhaled slowly, trying to keep her composure. "Ma'am, if you continue raising your voice and disrupting the cabin, I'll have no choice but to call the captain." Whitney snorted, arms crossed, eyes glued to Layla like a predator sizing up prey. "She's a fraud, a threat, a danger to this flight. Don't blame me if something goes wrong." Layla said nothing, but her silence wasn't weakness. It was rage, restrained. Humiliation, swallowed whole. She turned her gaze to the window, where the late afternoon sun had begun to fade. And inside that cabin, a force was approaching. A force Whitney Langford didn't know was coming, but one that would soon rewrite everything. Whitney Langford had no intention of backing down. If anything, Layla's silence and Elise's professionalism only seemed to enrage her further, fueling a tantrum soaked in entitlement. She yanked out her phone and held it up like a weapon. "Do you have any idea who I'm calling right now?" Whitney barked, spinning to address the entire cabin like she was delivering a keynote. "Thomas Langford, Deputy Attorney General of the United States. My husband. The man who oversees the entire federal security apparatus. One call, just one, and this pathetic airline will be under internal investigation within 24 hours. Passengers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. A young woman in seat 4D quietly lowered her head, activated her camera app, and began recording. But Whitney didn't care. She was intoxicated by her own imagined power, blind, self-satisfied, and oblivious to what was actually unfolding. Her glare snapped back to Layla, now twisted with contempt. "And you," she snarled, "you should be scrubbing toilets in a basement somewhere, not pretending you belong here. That first-class window seat was never meant for your kind." The air in the cabin froze solid. A loud snap echoed, not a retort, but a camera shutter. An elderly woman in seat 1F had turned around, eyes filled with fury. A young man in a hoodie at 5C quietly uploaded the first video to social media. Layla still didn't speak. She sat perfectly still, her hand clutching the hem of her blazer. But her face no longer reflected silent endurance. It reflected steel, forged in fire, hardened by restraint. Flight attendant Elise Carter took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Ma'am," she said clearly, "I must formally inform you. Your recent statements are racially discriminatory and constitute serious verbal harassment. This behavior violates federal aviation safety protocols and basic human rights." Whitney scoffed, a sharp, dismissive laugh, as if she'd just been told a bad joke. "Human rights? On a plane? Don't lecture me with your discount moralism. I have status. I have power. I have Thomas Langford. No one can touch me." Just rows behind, Agent Naomi Fields stared at her phone screen. A new message from FBI HQ had arrived. Target confirmed. Priority code 427A activated. Director Monroe has received alert. En route to cabin. She folded the device and slid it into her blazer. Her eyes, sharp, focused, locked onto Whitney Langford. The storm Whitney thought she was commanding was already surging to sweep her into collapse. While Whitney Langford continued her tirade about business cards, power, and "my husband is the Deputy Attorney General," a woman in seat 7A quietly removed her AirPods. Unlike the other passengers, she didn't look up in surprise. She observed. Her dark brown eyes, deep and cold as tempered steel, scanned the first-class cabin like a biometric scanner, recording every face, every sound, every signal. Agent Naomi Fields, senior FBI operative, currently embedded on Flight AA402 under the guise of a regular business-class passenger. She had been assigned a covert protection detail for a particular individual aboard this flight. Not a diplomat, not a whistleblower, but Layla Monroe, the only daughter of FBI Director Darius Monroe. Her instructions had been clear: do not intervene unless Layla's safety is compromised. The moment Whitney laid a hand on Layla's face, and the stream of bigotry came slashing like knives. Naomi knew the line had been crossed. She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and pulled out a phone. Not an iPhone, not any commercial brand. A secure black device with a single dark screen interface and one button. Priority code 427A. She pressed it. The screen flashed. Target confirmed. Layla Monroe. Physical threat detected. Racial discrimination involved. Suspect, Whitney Langford. Another tap. A high-level encrypted signal was instantly transmitted to the FBI Emergency Command Center, bypassing all commercial airport firewalls. Within 15 seconds, the device vibrated with a subtle buzz. New message displayed: order forwarded to Director Darius Monroe. Code 1X, national priority. Naomi looked up for the first time. Her gaze met Whitney Langford's. No frown, no emotion. Just a look, colder than any warning. Whitney, still high on her own delusions of influence, had no idea she was screaming into the face of the daughter of the most powerful man in America's security apparatus. And that every word, every insult, every unlawful act was being witnessed by one of the most lethal federal agents in the country. In a secured conference room in the airport's underground command floor, Director Darius Monroe had just been reviewing intelligence on an international trafficking ring. Then his secure phone gave a single buzz. He looked down, a message from Agent Fields. 427A, Layla compromised. Target Whitney Langford. Situation serious. Recommend immediate return. His eyes froze for a moment. Then he stood, slowly, but with the lethal focus of a blade being unsheathed. Cancel everything, he said to his assistant. Activate protocol. I'm going back to the plane, now. And in that moment, the calm skies above the airport seemed to tremble, because the fury of a father and the full weight of the United States had just been awakened. Tension inside Flight AA-402's first-class cabin had reached its breaking point. Whitney Langford, lipstick blazing red, eyes brimming with contempt, phone clenched like a weapon, stomped her designer heels on the carpet as if she were on a private red carpet, not an international flight. If no one here resolves this immediately, she barked, turning sharply to flight attendant Elise, I'll call the president myself. I have the right to do that, and I will. Because clearly no one on this aircraft is competent enough to protect us from imposters. The words, ridiculous as they were, froze the entire cabin. Some passengers raised their eyebrows, others sighed in exasperation. Flight attendant Elise Carter gripped the edge of her uniform skirt tightly, not from fear, but from the helplessness of witnessing power wielded without restraint. Then, footsteps, measured, steady, each one heavy with authority. Captain Reed Donovan emerged from the rear of the cabin, tall, crisp uniform, pilot's cap in hand, eyes serious behind aviator glasses. He said nothing at first. He looked at Whitney, then at Layla, then at Elise. I'm Captain Donovan, he finally said, his voice calm, firm and commanding. Can someone tell me what's going on here? Whitney pounced like a predator sensing opportunity. Her, she shrieked, pointing at Layla. She's an imposter. No ID. She stole a ticket to sneak into first class. I feel threatened. The other passengers do too. She's dangerous and needs to be removed immediately. Layla lifted her gaze. She didn't lower her head this time. She didn't flinch. She met the captain's eyes directly, clear, unwavering, sharp like glass. She didn't speak. She didn't plead. Because she had already sent the message. And the man who received it wasn't just her father. He was the storm. Captain Donovan nodded slowly. I'll personally verify everything, he said evenly. In the meantime, I ask all passengers to lower their voices and remain calm. But Whitney wasn't done. I refuse to sit near someone like her, she hissed. She's a threat to the safety of this flight, and if she isn't removed, I'll pull the entire Langford family's patronage from Astraeus Airlines. Her voice sliced through the air like a hammer through glass. Everyone in the cabin waited for someone, anyone, to put an end to this madness. What they didn't know was the man who would do exactly that was already on his way, and he didn't need to shout, he only needed to walk in. JFK International Airport, Government Access Corridor. A convoy of black armored SUVs raced down a restricted taxiway, escorted by flashing lights and airport security. No regular passengers witnessed the scene. It all unfolded behind the veil of the civilian terminal, where the real America operates. Inside the lead vehicle, Darius Monroe removed his official FBI director's badge from his collar and replaced it with a top-secret executive clearance tag, only used in the highest-level emergencies. Flight AA-402, temporary command is now under my authority. Deploy Sphinx team to the cabin immediately. Code 427A, initiate identity reveal. Understood, Director. Meanwhile, first-class cabin, Flight AA-402. Whitney Langford was still shouting, her voice crackling with wounded pride and unchallenged arrogance. Layla remained still, like a drawn bowstring stretched to its absolute limit, but not yet released. And then, a shift. Something subtle, but unmistakable. From 4 separate corners of the first-class cabin, seats 1D, 2F, 4B, and 6C, 4 passengers who appeared perfectly ordinary suddenly closed their laptops and stood up in unison. No one said a word. There was no signal the public could see, only eye contact, and the silent command that had just been transmitted. Undercover FBI operatives, 4 of them. They had been there all along. No one knew. They moved smoothly into position, near the exit, near Layla, near Whitney, and next to flight attendant Elise Carter. One agent tapped his earpiece and whispered, "Sphinx team in position, awaiting target confirmation." Then, the first-class front cabin door lit red. Click, the latch released, the door opened. And in that instant, every sound, every breath, every argument vanished into stunned silence. Darius Monroe stepped inside, his slate-gray suit still flawless, his expression carved in stone. No entourage, no announcement, just a look. And an entire cabin crumbled. The soft thud of leather shoes echoed across the first-class carpet. No one spoke, no one dared move. Even Whitney Langford, the woman who had just screamed at everyone, seemed frozen in place. The man who had just entered needed no introduction. Tall, commanding, eyes like cold steel, power radiated from every step he took. Darius Monroe, director of the FBI, a name that made even the nation's top security systems pause for breath. But today he didn't wear the face of a federal leader. He wore the face of a father. He stopped in the center of the cabin, said nothing. Every eye turned toward him. Passengers, flight attendants, even the undercover agents who now silently raised their hands to their chests in salute. Layla looked up, and when her eyes met her father's, the rest of the world seemed to disappear. "Dad," she whispered as if she couldn't believe it. Darius walked toward her, slowly, purposefully. He bent down and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Layla nodded, lips trembling. Then he turned, to face Whitney Langford. The entire cabin held its breath. "What did you just do to my daughter?" His voice was deep, low, cold enough to burn. Whitney stammered, struggling to form words with a mouth that suddenly no longer worked. I didn't know. She was your daughter." "No." Darius cut her off. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You didn't need to know, because you should have treated her with respect, regardless of who she is, whose daughter she is, or what title she holds." Then from his jacket pocket, he pulled a gold-plated badge and held it up for the entire cabin to see. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Director. Captain Reed Donovan froze mid-breath. Flight attendant Elise Carter's mouth dropped open. Several passengers covered theirs with their hands, too shocked to speak. Darius slowly rotated the badge, handing it to Captain Donovan like an unspoken command. "I am now assuming authority over this flight, effective immediately." He turned back to the cabin, "And before this plane takes off, someone will be leaving their first-class seat. But it won't be my daughter." Whitney Langford stood frozen in place. Her bold red lipstick now looked out of place on a face drained of all color. She stared at the gold-plated FBI badge in Darius Monroe's hand. an irrefutable symbol of the horrifying truth that had just landed on her like a hammer. The man she had threatened was the director of the FBI, and the girl she had insulted, humiliated, and even laid hands on was his daughter. I didn't know. If I had known, I never would have, Whitney stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. Darius didn't respond. He simply looked at her, a silent stare, sharp as a blade. No shouting, no table slamming, no pointing fingers. Because he knew true power never has to raise its voice. He turned to Flight Attendant Elise Carter, his tone calm and precise, like a man giving orders in the middle of an active federal operation. "What seat is she assigned to?" Elise glanced at the manifest. 3C, aisle seat, sir." Darius nodded, then looked back at Whitney, his voice dropping an octave, like ice forming across a still lake. "Then that's correct, but you've been standing in the wrong place for far too long." He shifted his gaze to Captain Donovan. "I'm invoking special authority to reassign passenger seating due to a security protocol. There's an elderly woman in economy with an injured leg. Move her to seat 3C. Donovan nodded. "Yes, sir." Whitney opened her mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. Darius's eyes bore down on her like gravity. "I don't need to bring anyone down to protect my daughter," he said, turning his voice to address the entire cabin. "I just need the right people, in the right place." Whitney Langford was quietly escorted back to economy. No one in the cabin intervened. No one defended her. Moments later, a silver-haired elderly woman was gently helped into the front row. Layla stood and gave up her window seat. Darius nodded respectfully to the woman, then sat beside his daughter. And for the first time since the flight began, the entire first-class cabin broke into applause. Not for power, but because justice had spoken. With a calm that could not be shaken, Whitney Langford stumbled back to economy class, her face pale, her steps unsteady, as if she had just been ripped from a hallucination of power. There were no more nods of recognition, no more admiring glances, only one stark truth now hung in the air. She was not the most powerful person on this flight, and she had just publicly insulted the daughter of the man holding the keys to the nation's power. Back in first class, an older gentleman in a grey suit, seated at 2F, gave a soft snort and muttered half-joking, "Guess she just learned the hard way. Never flash your business card at someone whose card you haven't seen yet." Darius Monroe heard it, but he didn't smile. He turned to Layla, gently adjusting her seatbelt. His voice still calm. "Are you all right?" Layla nodded slightly, her eyes still glistening. "Just sad, because none of this would have happened if I weren't your daughter." That sentence made Darius pause. He gripped her hand slightly tighter, his gaze fixed straight ahead. "That's exactly why I have to do more, Layla. Not just for you, but for everyone who's ever been treated like this, with no one to stand for them." A few minutes later, Darius's phone vibrated softly. A message from FBI headquarters. "Thomas Langford is calling repeatedly, cross-referencing files. He reports directly to you with monthly updates from the Department of Justice." Darius raised an eyebrow, then turned to Captain Donovan and Flight Attendant Elise Carter. "I need the name of the disruptive passenger, one last time." Elise handed him the passenger manifest. Name, Whitney Langford. Darius's mouth curved, not into a smile, but into something far colder. "Langford?" he said aloud, his voice cutting across the cabin. "Her husband is Thomas Langford, the man who reports to me every month." The entire cabin fell dead silent. Back in economy, Whitney heard every word. The name, it was unmistakable, undeniable. The panic behind her eyes erupted, too large to hide. Several passengers turned to stare. Someone started live streaming. "Wait," FBI director, holy, someone whispered from the back rows. Whitney turned her face away, trembling, but it was too late. She knew her husband's career could have just gone up in flames. Not because of violence, not because of scandal, but because of one sentence. No one in first class spoke a word, not out of fear, but because they had just witnessed something greater than power, self-respect, defended with dignity and quiet strength. Whitney Langford, however, could not stay still. From her downgraded seat in economy, she muttered to herself, clutching her phone like it still held the promise of a rescue call from her husband. But now every eye was on her, and none looked at her with respect, only with the gaze one gives to a person whose mask has shattered. Up front, Darius Monroe said nothing more to her. Instead, he leaned toward Captain Donovan and spoke quietly. No punishment, no retaliation. We just need to do the right thing. Then he turned to Elise Carter, the flight attendant who had stood firm from the beginning. The elderly woman earlier, does she have what she needs? Elise nodded, a bit apologetically. Airport medics checked her before boarding, but economy seating didn't allow her to stretch her leg. I'm so sorry. No need to be, Darius gently interrupted. Bring her up. Right now. Minutes later, a silver-haired woman slowly made her way forward with the help of a flight attendant and a walking aide. Darius and Layla both stood up at once, offering their first-class seats side by side. Darius placed a respectful hand on the woman's shoulder. These seats should have been yours all along. The elderly lady looked up, eyes misty. Thank you. Thank you. I never thought I'd sit in a place like this. No one mentioned Whitney's name, no one had to. But when the elderly woman settled into seat 3C, the very one Whitney had screamed to claim, everyone understood that justice had spoken. Not with fists, not with shouting, but with a quiet, dignified exchange, rooted in humanity. A boy seated in 5A turned to his mother and whispered, "Mum, is that man a real-life superhero?" The mother didn't answer with words. She simply nodded, eyes glassy with emotion. Darius returned to his new seat beside Layla, quietly buckled her seatbelt again. No more speeches were needed. Silence now was the loudest strike of all. The Australis Airlines Airbus A350 began rolling down the runway. Golden hues of sunset poured through the windows, bathing the first-class cabin in a soft amber glow, as if the sky itself was bowing to what had just transpired. Layla Monroe leaned her head back against the seat. There were still traces of tears in her eyes. But not from pain. It was from something far more rare. Her father, the man America always needed, for once, belonged solely to her, even if only for this one moment. She turned her head. Darius Monroe, no longer the FBI director, no longer the face of federal authority, was simply Dad now, with eyes softened and a voice rarely heard outside whispered goodnights. He held her hand. No need for speeches, just a hand in hers, the very gesture she had longed for since childhood, through every piano recital played to an empty seat, every award ceremony where no one stood beside her for a picture. Do you remember that night when I was 9? Layla asked quietly, eyes still gazing out the window. The school party. I waited the whole evening. The lights dimmed, the music started. I looked around, and you never came. Darius gently tightened his grip on her hand. His eyes clouded, not because of his title, but because of all the absences he had left in her heart. That night, I was tracking a terrorist planning to bomb the central station. I know, Layla said with a small, forgiving smile. I've never blamed you. But... She paused. Today was the first time I saw you choose me, instead of America. Darius turned toward her, his gaze no longer cold, no longer burdened by protocol or mission. He was just a father, carrying love, apology, and pride in equal measure. Layla, he said quietly, I used to think protecting this country was the most important duty of my life. But I was wrong. Protecting you is the one thing I should never have forgotten. Layla smiled, tears pooling again. Well then, this time, Dad, you got it right. Outside, the aircraft lifted off, and Layla's heart grew lighter with each vibration of the engines. Not because she was flying to Santorini, but because for the first time, she wasn't flying alone. Flight AA402 landed smoothly in Santorini after nearly 10 hours in the air. But the real turbulence had only just begun. Just hours after touchdown, a 2-minute 17-second video showing Whitney Langford berating and assaulting Layla Monroe surfaced online with the title, White Woman Attacks Black Teen in First Class Until FBI Director Steps In. The clip went viral, shared over 2 million times in just 6 hours. It spread like wildfire across platforms, from Twitter to CNN. The media exploded. Hashtags quickly topped the trending lists. Justice for Layla. Privilege unmasked. She didn't know whose daughter. And it didn't stop there. Internet sleuths wasted no time unmasking the woman in the video as Whitney Langford. And soon after, another name took the spotlight. Thomas Langford, United States Deputy Attorney General, Whitney's husband. At the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., the fallout hit like a bomb. Major news outlets demanded a formal response. Opposition senators issued public statements. The pressure became uncontainable. 3 days after the incident, Thomas Langford submitted his resignation. The press release was brief and offered no justification. Meanwhile, Austrias Airlines issued a 4-page statement that included a permanent flight ban on Whitney Langford across all routes, a formal commendation for flight attendant Elise Carter for her professionalism, and most notably, the launch of a new mandatory training program for all staff focused on handling passengers from marginalized communities with fairness and respect. During a Saturday night primetime talk show, a host asked the question many were wondering. She wouldn't have acted that way if she'd known Layla was the FBI director's daughter. Is that the only reason this changed everything? The anchor smiled slightly, replied softly, "Number everything changed, because this time America saw it. And this time, no one looked away." In Santorini, Layla Monroe sat in her hotel room watching the news unfold on her iPad. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She just exhaled slowly and turned the screen off. "You okay?" Darius asked, pouring coffee from across the room. Layla nodded with a gentle smile. "I didn't want her to lose everything. But maybe justice has to begin in the one place people always thought they were safe." 1 week later, at the Santorini International Convention Center, Layla Monroe stepped up to the podium before hundreds of delegates from over 40 countries. No one in the hall knew what had happened on Flight AA402. But everyone felt it. This 16-year-old girl wasn't just carrying a speech. She carried a wound still healing, a story left open, and a faith in justice that needed to be rekindled. Layla took a deep breath. The spotlight cast down on her face, young, composed, but carrying something far beyond her years: resilience. "I used to think justice was something the powerful gave you if you behaved, if you were good enough, and if you stayed quiet. I was wrong." The entire hall fell silent. Justice doesn't wait for you to be accepted. Justice isn't reserved for those with status, diplomatic passports, or polished business cards. Justice is something every human being deserves, simply because they exist, because they are human. From the front row, Darius Monroe watched his daughter in silence. No bodyguards, no official insignia, just a father hearing his daughter speak to the world for the first time, with the voice he had once, unintentionally, forced her to silence. Layla looked up, her eyes clear as glass, but burning with conviction. I'm not standing here because of who my father is. I'm standing here because someone once questioned whether I even belonged in my seat. And today I speak for everyone who's ever been asked that question. In classrooms, on airplanes, in hospitals, in boardrooms. Yes, we do belong, because we are human. The applause that followed thundered through the hall, not out of pity, but because the truth had finally been spoken. That day the media called Layla the girl who changed first class forever. But that night Layla wrote only one line in her journal. Justice doesn't come from privilege. It begins with someone brave enough to stand still. When the world tries to make you bow, sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a roar. It arrives through the quiet grip of a hand between a father and his daughter. In a first-class cabin once believed to be reserved for only a select few, Layla Monroe didn't change the world with power, but with unshaken silence, with the calm of her gaze in the face of humiliation, with her final words not to seek revenge, but to affirm her own worth. This story isn't just for those who are ever told, "You don't belong here." It's a reminder to all of us. You don't have to be someone to deserve respect. You only have to be human. And sometimes it takes just one person to stand up, for the whole world to fall silent and listen.